You are listening to the Special Needs Children podcast with Chitra Iyer. Chitra Iyer is a parent of 24-year-old Shravan Iyer, who has epilepsy, cerebral palsy and autism. She is the CEO of MFA and has been helping families with life-centered planning to reach their personal financial goals. She is also a trustee of a parent support group, the FFA, Forum for Autism, which was set up almost 2 decades ago. MFA is an organization which was established in 2005 and is working in the personal finance space. They have set up a dedicated practice to help families with special needs children to plan their financial goals and invest for them. The thoughts shared here are as a result of the discussion with parents, caregivers, siblings, and professionals regarding the planning of a person with special needs. In this expert series podcast, Chitra Iyer is talking to Ms. Aloka Guha, Chairperson at the National Trust for Persons with Autism, Cerebral Palsy, Intellectual Disability, and Multiple Disabilities. In this interview, Ms. Aloka shares about her journey and experience in the field of disability support and rehabilitation in India.
A big warm welcome to all of you on this expert series of my podcast for special needs children. Hi everyone. Thank you, dear Miss Aloka Guha, for your time and agreeing to do this interview with me.
I'm hugely pleased and happy to be associated with the work that you are doing, Chitra.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Waiting to listen to you. I'll straight away start off with a formal introduction to you for our listeners. Ms. Aloka Guha has held the esteemed position of Chairperson at the National Trust for Persons with Autism, Cerebral Palsy, Mental Retardation, and Multiple Disabilities. In addition to her role at the National Trust, Ms. Aloka Guha has also served as a rehabilitation consultant at the Rehabilitation Council of India, which is RCI. She worked in the mental health unit of the World Health Organization's regional office and introduced autism work in the WHO. She also did a 5-year consultancy work with the Prime Minister of Bangladesh, Sheikh Hasina's daughter, a psychologist, Saima Hussain, on a national project for autism. Ms. Aloka Guha's remarkable contributions have been a cornerstone in the ongoing development of disability support and rehabilitation in India. So with your permission, ma'am, the first question coming to you is, as a former chairperson of the National Trust for Persons with Disabilities, could you tell us about some of the key initiatives or programs that have made a significant impact on individuals with disabilities and their families in India?
Thank you for inviting me to do this, Chitra. This is something very close to my heart because I was associated with the National Trust for at least 10 years before it was passed in Parliament. And how is that? Because when in 1987, an amended Mental Health Act, which until then had included persons with mental retardation, terminology used then, along with those with mental illness under their guardianship rules. That was changed. So effectively, the guardianship part for mental retarded persons was no longer available under the Mental Health Act, which means there was this big gap. So 2 people, Mr. Soli Sorabji and Dr. Thakur Hariprasad, both parents, both very large personalities. They first started this process in 1987 as to what will happen to our children if we can't get legal guardianship. They got in touch with me in 1988 towards the end. I was then a very vocal activist, rehab professional in Chennai. And at that time, despite what the narrative that some parents' organizations are now loudly proclaiming, there were no parents other than these 2 persons in the advocacy campaign. Nobody at that time had got onto the bandwagon as such. The real credit, other than to Soli Sarabji and Thakur Hari Prasad, goes to two bureaucrats. One who was then secretary, Mr. K.K. Bakshi, and one who was joint secretary, Mrs. Gauri Chatterjee. So the process started for the advocacy for the National Trust, started somewhere in the late 1980s. But there was this front burner, back burner, front burner, back burner impact with varying secretaries to the Ministry of Social Welfare. Finally, in 1994, the government, and I must tell you, Mr. K.K. Bakshi had a child with disability. And I fought for, it was initially only for those with mental retardation. I fought and included CP because I was then director of the Swastika Society of Tamil Nadu. Mary Barua fought and got autism included. And multiple disability came as a logical addition. 1994, the Government of India set up a drafting committee, and I was a member of that drafting committee, as was Mary Barua. And that's when the whole thing picked up speed. Maneka Gandhi was then the minister in charge, and she thought it was a very good idea. So this drafting committee, with the draft prepared, and it was headed by Dr. Amita Danda, a legal professor in legal matters. We went around the country, literally, talking about the trust, explaining its objectives, explaining its scope, its significance, talked to many parents, professionals, and persons with disabilities. And that, I think, was the very beginning. What was my contribution specifically? Well, in the draft, when we were discussing the formation, the constitution of the National Trust Board, which was seen as the highest decision-making body in the trust, I insisted on adding 1/3 of the board members as persons with these disabilities themselves. Well, there was a huge row over this. Other board members would not accept that people. At that time, our thinking was different. This is going back, more than 20, 30 years. So 1994. So at that time, people couldn't imagine that people with these 4 disabilities would actually be represented on the board. And I said, if you don't include them, I'm going to resign. And I went and wrote a letter, formed a letter to Mr. K.K. Bakshi to say, I don't want to be a part of this non-progressive board drafting committee. And of course, as I did that, everybody realized that, no, I don't think we should create these kind of disturbances. And they agreed. Now, this is going back 30 years. And this, at that point, nobody agreed with me. Later on, everybody took credit that, see, we were so forward looking. Humne disabled people's voices ko. Us waqt bhi, even at that time, we listened to the voices of people with disabilities. And now, every time the board election comes up, you have people with these disabilities ringing each other up across the country, ringing up people, talking to people, advocating for themselves, discussing their possible inclusion on the board and what are the points that they would take forward. To me, that is like a political role of persons with disability. And I was very happy with that. The second thing, my contribution was, I remember we were all sitting around in NIMH in their main meeting hall, and we didn't know where to begin. So obviously we said, okay, let's begin with what we think are the objectives. People were saying, kya kare? So I suddenly got up and I went to the blackboard and I wrote the first objective: to enable and empower persons with disabilities to live as close to their families as possible, including in rural areas. Again, वो ज़माने में empowerment, enablement की बात सोचते ही नहीं थे. It was all welfare, charity. So anyway, everybody agreed to that. And from then, the legal guardianship objective flowed. which was, of course, the primary reason for the National Trust's very existence, and so on. So I was the first non-IAS person to be appointed in the rank of Secretary to the Government of India with full pay and benefits. It was not an honorary post. And I joined on the 10th of April, and on the 17th of April, Dr. Uma Tuli joined as Chief Commissioner for Disability. So our ministry, for the first time, were taking in two people from the NGO sector, from the private sector, and giving them this huge responsibility. Needless to say, there was a lot of opposition from official lobbies. They felt that it takes us, joint secretary level people were talking and saying that it takes us 30 years to reach secretary level and get all those benefits. And these people are coming in at a lateral entry level and deriving all the benefits. So first 2 years, I had to fight with a big official bureaucrat lobby. They didn't accept me. And it's only after being able to prove my sincerity, my integrity, and my knowledge. There are a lot of things that I could talk about and write that they were not sure of or not aware of. So I actually had to earn, even from the official lobby, I had to earn my place as Chairperson, National Trust. The other issue was that I went around the country. Why? Because nobody understood the identity of the National Trust. ये क्या है क्या? ये NGO है? ये सरकारी दफ्तर है? Is it a blend of the two? You've given a position of Secretary to the Government of India to an NGO person. What's going on? What's happening? Is the government even serious about it? So I actually went around the entire country. Only Arunachal Pradesh I've been once, everywhere, 3 times, 4 times, explaining to people the objectives, not just parents and professionals and disabled people, but also to governments. And the district magistrate had a huge role to play in the National Trust. So I would have meetings with DMs, not only in their districts, but also through video conferencing from the capital. I remember at that time, Hyderabad had the best video conferencing facilities going back many years. So the first time I would go, I would explain to them what it is about and what I expect of them and what I'm able to provide from the National Trust. So it was like, you do this, I do this, and together we can better empower people with disability. So second time, I would find out what they were doing. So there was lots of questions and answers as they started. And the third time that I met the same group of DMs, they would talk about what they had done, and I would listen very proudly, I might add. So that whole journey of taking this trust and its work, creating an identity for the National Trust, that took almost 3 years. It was a lot of work. It's a big country, and there was just so much lack of information about disability and the potential of people with disabilities. And it was well nigh impossible to get them motivated. But after they actually went around and if I'm visiting as a state guest, so there will be people who would have to actually go and check out the NGOs working in this sector, who are the registered ones, who will they have to work with, and they'd come back very impressed. So this whole process of government NGO partnership was part of this development of an identity for the National Trust. And from there, we actually formulated very clear-cut action plans for each state, along with the DMs. And of course, the other thing was, when we drafted the National Trust Act, there was no role for the state government, not mentioned anywhere. But when you come to implement, when you want government officers to go and check out the NGO before you register it with the National Trust, and you need the state government. Of course, you need the state government. So one of my strategies was to develop very close coordination with the state government. So when I visited the states, I would go and meet the governor first, then I would go and meet the chief minister, then I would go and meet the council of ministers, then I would meet the chief secretary, the secretaries involved, and of course, the rest of the NGO sector. So it was a lot of hard work, and I was constantly traveling. I remember sometimes at the rate of 21 days at a stretch. I remember coming home and telling my husband, I have 10 days leave. And my husband said, what? How can you get 10 days leave?
Oh my God.
What would you take 10 days leave for? I said, no, leave nahi hai. Magar mujhe travel nahi karna hai 10 din because I have a lot of meetings lined up. So to me, it was just so wonderful to be just able to sit in the office, sit in Delhi, work with the normal routine work. So I think if you ask me, what has been my main contribution? I think it's the first objective of the National Trust. I try to empower people. I try to enable people through parents, through professionals, and make sure that the admin costs, I was very strict about that. Admin costs, we had our own money, as you may know. And at that time when we were planning, we talked about 100 crores. But over a period of time, the interest rates fell very badly, and we didn't have as much money as we thought we would, because we could only use the interest and not the capital. So I fought hard to keep the admin costs low and develop schemes like the caregivers scheme, which I thought was important, the SNAC, the State Nodal Agency scheme, because we had only an office in Delhi. So who was going to do the work in the states? So a very professional, thorough review of the people who were. I remember when we were preparing this scheme for the State Nodal Agency, we had applications from NGOs who thought they were brilliant. But when I looked at their annual expenditure, it was actually less than what we were giving for the SNAC National Trust activities. So there was no way I was going to accept that. But anyway, we had a committee. We selected only those who were themselves financially sound, who believed in advocacy, who did a lot of work outside of their centers, and who had good trained rehabilitation professionals, because part of their work was to train parents, to train professionals, to train themselves in how to raise funds, how to financially better manage their organization. Now, Chitra, if you were available then, I would have been very happy to introduce you as a trainer in financial management NGOs. And we had lots of printed books. I believed in developing written material and in translating them into various regional languages. And I admit some of those translations were horrendous, were really bad. But we tried our best, and we sold them. I was not going to give even one book free to anybody. So they were like 10 rupees, 15 rupees, and they sold in lakhs. So we developed a lot of material for doctors on each of their disabilities, on legal guardianship, on doctors' work with the neurodevelopment disabilities, etc. So I think in addition to what I said earlier, my main contribution was in introducing the concept of multi-sectorality. I had worked in Chennai before that, and the Chennai Tamil Nadu government was exceptionally supportive. I worked with education department, social welfare department, rural development department, urban development department, panchayat department, and of course the health ministry with all its various departments. So I benefited hugely from piggybacking. Piggybacking on existing schemes is much more cost effective, is much more reach effective than having vertical programs which are not sustainable. So I tried wherever there was a program, whether it was sports, whether it was inclusive education, whether it was culture, whether it was Manrega, that existing schemes, you ride on those. You get them to add a component of disability into existing schemes, into existing programs, including training. Doctors ko training ho raha hai, bhaiya, disability mein training do. And that worked very well. And I think that concept was hugely appreciated by the ministry when I was working there. Some of the DMs, most of the DMs that I worked with were wonderful. I loved that group of people. Young, bright, innovative, creative, forward-looking guys. And I specifically remember one particular district magistrate from Nilgiris who wrote a book, small little chitty book, on the role of the district administration in the empowerment of persons with disabilities. Beautiful book. She wrote it, and I got it printed. I circulated hundreds and thousands of copies. Everybody learned so much. So what did she do? Her name was Supriya Sahu, who later on came to Delhi, became big, got big posts, etc. So in that little chitty book, Supriya had actually written the role of the district magistrate, role of the rehabilitation council, rehabilitation officer, role of the education officer, role of the health officer, role of the Anganwadi worker, role of the BDO. हर एक का अलग-अलग क्या role हो सकता है, possible role of each of the district administration's personnel in disability management. She was awesome. And she showed that, I showcased that, we did a video, again we circulate the entire Nilgiris district. She did a survey. She knew exactly where 20-year-old blind girls were living. She knew exactly where 10-year-old physically handicapped children were living. She did something from her programs. Jawal Rozgar Yojana, she got homes for disabled people, even in a mountainous area like Nilgiris. So she got every person with disability integrated into the regular government schemes, existing ones, without creating a big new vertical unsustainable program. So that is one of the biggest lessons that I think collaborating with the state government, particularly with the DMs, taught me. And the other thing was IGNU. IGNU was wonderful to us. We had programs, they had video conferencing programs. We would do so much training through them. And through all of these people, I doff my hat in recollection that thank you for all that you've done, and the new strategies, the new trends, the new pathways you showed to take a low profile topic like disability forward.
It's beautiful. What an amazing recounting of all the hard work and by you and so many more people over the years.
And also, if I may interrupt, Chitra,
brilliant.
Because I was the chairman of the national chairperson of the National Trust, I was only a disability trained person in the ministry. So when the UNCRPD came up, in the first year, nobody from India participated. And there was a lot of negative feedback around the world, and people would write and send phone messages like, what is happening? Why is India not participating? So I went to our secretary, who was Mr. K. He was Mr. It'll come to me, a very, very, very good gentleman. He took me to meet the foreign secretary. And he said, why are we not participating at that time? From then, we were trying to be part of the UNGA, part of the Security Council. India wanted a seat. So at that time, when Foreign Secretary heard us out, he says, no, we must participate actively. So from then on, from the second meeting onwards, I was sent as part of the Indian delegation, sometimes by myself with one or two others, sometimes led by the Secretary to the Government of India. And we participated very extensively. And believe me, I was part of the drafting committee.
Wow.
We were 30 countries selected. We spent 2 weeks in January, New York. It was snowing like crazy, and we were working till 11 at night. And I almost wrote entirely chapter 24, which was on education. And as I said, I was the only disability professional there. So I had free right AAC, and they would come and ask me, what is AAC? Things Small things like include. In fact, in the chapter on education, we will find there's no mention of special schools. I only talked of inclusive education, and everybody got that, and we got huge support from everywhere. So that was something that I thoroughly enjoyed. I learned so much on how United Nations conventions are conducted, how they are harmonized, what arguments take place, and even for small commas, the little prepositions, there would be fights and arguments. But it was a hugely beneficial time for our country.
Really. I mean, people need to listen to this to know the kind of hard work that's happened over the years for us to have reached. Of course, it's been a long trek, but yeah, if it weren't for all of this, we wouldn't have reached where we are today. And a huge, huge thank you to you for this. I'm moving on that, in this entire extensive experience, how has the landscape of disability support and rehabilitation evolved in India? And what role have your contributions played in this transformation? Can you please share with us?
Yeah, sure. The world has changed completely. This has been 45 to 46 years since I started working in the sector. At that time, there was this charity mode. There was this medical model of rehabilitation. I actually remember in Bombay, when I was working with the Association for the Welfare of Persons with Mental Handicap, we would sit with the doctor, the physiotherapist, occupational therapist, speech therapist, psychologist, social worker, and special educator. We would keep the child in the center, and we would sit around the child discussing what his future will be, what we must do to make sure that he is as close to being so-called normal as other children. Parents would stand outside the door like culprits, as if they'd done something wrong. Nobody talked to them. Nobody asked their opinion. We decided, the medical team, we decided what the child's future would be. That is the medical world. And very often when what we think is right for the child, parents don't agree with that. And the person would say, I don't want a wheelchair. I like crawling around. So that model, medical model, the charity model, the welfare model, that has changed completely. Now, most good NGOs will have either parents on their board or people with disabilities themselves, and several training sessions where people with disabilities train the teachers, the physiotherapists, the occupational therapists, etc. Their voices are now being heard. I remember in 2016, the latest RPWD bill was ready in 2012, I think. But there was such a logjam in Parliament that couldn't be passed, couldn't even be discussed. But finally, in December 2016, it was passed unanimously. By then, I think, there was this understanding that people with disabilities are a valuable vote bank, not just by themselves, but because their families, their well-wishers, their extended groups, communities. This was passed without any discussion, the RPWD Act. Now, as I said, I still find, although it's better than before, there is disability-specific discrimination within the large disability fact. Now, when I say their voices are being heard more, that's largely men's voices, disabled people's voices, men's voices, not so much women's voices. And that is something that we need to rectify, because there are a large number of women with disabilities. Only a few of them, like Anuradha Mohit, or now we have several people, Neeta Sehgal, I'm sorry, I'm getting some of the names wrong, Jija Ghosh, there is Delhi professor, then she's retired now, but she's a wheelchair user, fought strongly for women's rights. But the point is, women with disabilities, they're neither part of the gender narrative nor part of the disability narrative. Disability narrative is ruled almost entirely by men with disability, changing slowly. Nidhi Singhal is one of those who's fighting hard. Anuradha Mohit was fighting hard. She was one of the first women with disabilities whose voices were heard over and above the narrative of the men. So that slowly is changing, but there's lots more to be done in terms of women with disabilities, in terms of the disability discrimination. People with locomotor impairment, people with visual impairment, people with hearing impairment. They are heard more often. Why? Because they're self-advocates. And people with autism, CP, ID, they're parent advocates. And so they don't get heard as loudly or as clearly as they should. So that is where we need to focus on, move into a non-discrimination policy within the disability. 21 disabilities we now have, and there's still discrimination. There's a lot of discrimination within these categories, and data shows that. People with these 3 disabilities that I mentioned are more retained in schools and colleges. How many people with autism actually go to colleges? They're finishing school. Are they going to colleges? Who is advocating for them? Are they able to even people with wheelchairs are now accessing the school. Are they accessing learning? Are we teaching our teachers to help understand children with autism? Are we helping them? Are the teachers understanding autistic kids as much as they understand blind kids or hearing impaired kids or mobility impaired kids? They don't. There is data to prove that there is a lot of dropouts in the neurodevelopmental disability categories. And what have I done? I'm going to start with my first job in India in early intervention. In your city, Chitra, in Mumbai, we started the first AWMH. AWMH. Yeah. This is in early 1980s. Okay, so we started the first urban slum community clinics for all the developmentally disabled children, and we moved from, say, Kandivali in the morning to Andheri in the afternoon. So 5 days in a week, we were in 10 different places. It was huge. Of course, I was much younger and all of us were young then. We were able to manage. But even then, the doctors themselves didn't understand. Acha, Aloka, ye 5-month-old baby, what will you do with them? Karoge kya? And then JJ Hospital offered us their first newborn at-risk children's clinic. So we were looking at children who were half an hour old, 1 hour old. They came straight out of the NICU or to the delivery room, and the doctors got to know that we were given a clinic there. So every day we would have one clinic in JJ Hospital. We were looking at absolutely newborn babies. And at that time, their assessment was as important as their positioning or their interventions. So that was a huge contribution, looking at newborn screening, which I took to Chennai. We did that in many hospitals, and they continue to do that. And then, of course, many others. All over Tamil Nadu, we had partners, NGO partners whom we trained, and this newborn screening clinic, and the understanding of the importance of early intervention. That is something that I have been very happy with. And I mentioned earlier about multi-sectoral linkages. That's so good, so cost-effective, so reach-effective, and so inclusive in nature. जो है आप उसको थोड़ा amend करो, थोड़ा change करो, उसी में include करो, अलग-अलग program मत करो, वो हम financially sustain नहीं कर पाएंगे, नहीं कर पाते. So in Tamil Nadu, we had the first policy on children. Jayalalitha Madam was Chief Minister. So 1984, 83, we had the first policy on children. promoted by UNICEF. And because I was working with UNICEF, we actually had one chapter on disability, chapter 15. Then Jayalalitha Madam had a 15-point program for children, including one on children with disability. Next year, she came up with a policy on disability. That was the first state, and I was so happy to be proud of both. First state which had a disability policy way back in 1985. Sorry, 1995, 94, 95. Two policies way ahead of everyone else in the country. So we were particularly lucky in Tamil Nadu because the government was very supportive. Every department supported us. So emphasis on early intervention and early detection, including babies who are half an hour old, babies who are at risk, small for date babies, post-mature babies, premature babies, babies who had difficulty breathing initially, whose scores on the APGAR score were very low, and so on. So the emphasis on the first part of life, which decides the rest of your life, that has, I think, been my big contribution, and also the multi-sectorality of the rehabilitation concept. And the third is understanding inclusion. Not just inclusive education, but inclusion at workplace, inclusion in the community, inclusion at every level.
That's amazing, really. You've shared the length and breadth of your work and summarized it so beautifully also. Thank you again, Aloka ma'am. Moving on.
My pleasure.
What advice would you offer to aspiring advocates and professionals looking to make a positive impact in the field of disability support and rehabilitation in India today?
That's a good one. Thank you. I've always felt that because my work started at a period where segregation and special schools were the norm rather than the exception, I've always felt that most people, including parents, they don't believe in the potential of their child. Would you agree with me, Chitra?
Well, it's a whole mixed bag, I guess. Yeah. But yes, majority of parents
Don't.
don't.
So I would like to say to anybody who's listening to me today, whether it's a parent or a professional or a government person or just a layman, believe in the potential of the child. He's a child first and disabled second. So that's one of the other things that I've noticed changing the terminology. First, we would say idiots, morons, cretins. Then we would say handicapped. Then we thought we were being very nice and we used words like differently abled. Then we would say challenged. All of that is not legal. The legal term is person with disability. Personhood. You recognize the personhood first. See that person as a person and then as a person with disability. So the terminology has changed drastically. In your earlier question, I wanted to mention that, is just that I forgot. So my advice would be believe in the potential, the abilities, the talents of every child. Every child can. The earlier you start, the better. But every person can. UNESCO used to say something at one time, no child is learning impaired. Yes, he may be visually impaired, hearing impaired. He is not, or she is not learning impaired. Children can, every child can learn. Actually, they learn best from their peer group. So believe in the potential of the person with disability. Believe in inclusion. Listen to their voices. Work with families. And most important, collaborate rather than confront authorities. That's a huge, I've always been pro-government, right or wrong. I've felt that they're also people. They may represent government, but इंसान ही तो है. आप कितने criticize करोगे, कितने उनके बारे में paper में लिखोगे? Won't it hurt them? Rather than that, let's persuade them. So I always moved away from confrontation, especially with authorities. And I've believed in collaboration. I've believed in the power of persuasion. You persuade a person who is sitting in that chair of authority that, sir, if you do this, you will be able to achieve this. Likh ke de do. Strongly, passionately believe, and then you can convince others that this is possible. And what's more, be specific. Don't just be, vague. For advocacy, vagueness doesn't work. Be specific. I want these 1, 2, 3 things done. So these are the ways in which you can do it. These are the people, the departments that can help you do it. And let's have a time frame, sir. And if this is done in the next 3 years, this is what we will see in the 4th year. So be specific and be persuasive. Try not to argue and criticize too much. Try to collaborate rather than confront. And perhaps the most important is work with the media. Make friends with the media. Make sure you have at least 2, 3 different newspapers or channels with whom you can share. Because that media is something that the government people fear the most. Don't use it just for your own personal agenda, but use it for a purpose which will benefit everybody. And then, I think I should have said this first. Understand laws. Understand policies. Understand rights. Because when we advocate, we're not advocating for one person with disability, we're advocating for the rights, the human rights and the fundamental freedoms of all persons. And that understanding is something you have to train persons with disabilities themselves and their parents, starting with early childhood education. Unless that disabled person is educated, he or she cannot claim any other right that is his, given to him not only by the Constitution of India, but also by the disability laws and by every other law in the country. So understand the laws. You can only be a good advocate if you are knowledgeable about rights. And where do the rights come from? They come from the laws. आसमान से नहीं गिरते हैं अधिकार. अधिकार एक law से आती है. Understand the Supreme Court judgments that have been made in favor of people with disabilities. So empower yourself before you go out and empower others.
That's really going to be helpful in a big way. And I think you just simplified it beautifully. Yeah. But
Thank you.
You gave a lot of basic groundwork that people need to stick to. I really like what you said about using the media. Definitely not for personal agenda, but to promote the overall awareness and overall movement and advocacy issues that we're trying to push forward. Lovely.
किसी के लिए आप लड़ाई करने जा रहे हो, सोचो आपके, supposing in your house your gold necklace is stolen. Supposing, Chitra, that your gold necklace is stolen, right? So you look everywhere for it, right? Then you go to the police station and you want to file a FIR, right? Now, if that police person says, no, I won't write an FIR, you go and look for you are disheartened. But if you know which law gives you the right, which law, which section, which subsection gives you the right to file an FIR, then that fellow in the police station will have to do it, right?
Absolutely.
So fight from a position of knowledge, informed advocacy. Just going and standing in the street with 10 people in wheelchairs and putting up placards, that's not
doesn't help me. True.
That's just like nice photo op.
PR.
Nice PR, but ultimately you need to be informed.
It has to, yes.
If you want impact.
Lovely. Completely agree. So, as someone deeply involved in the field, what are those three essential changes you envision for better support and services for individuals with disabilities? Aloka ma'am.
Okay, okay. Uh, I've watched this movement for 40 years, and we've talked about doles, bhata. In Bengali, we say bhata. In Hindi, we say bhata. So these welfare schemes for people with disabilities. For example,
Yeah.
in Tamil Nadu, we used to have a scheme that every time you marry a girl with disability, you will get 10,000 rupees. So this guy went and married 5 women, 5 disabled women. He gave them 5,000 rupees each, of 2,000, and they were quite happy. So he made his money and he didn't have to look after them. Now, if somebody had actually guided him and informed him that you take 5 women and you teach them basic education, you teach them their rights, that would have made change. So this movement away from doles to empowerment, I think that is my advice. Not only through education, through skilling, through awareness, but shiksha. The importance of shiksha, starting like everybody else does from preschool, as it's come through in the NEP in 2020, a document that I'm very proud to teach often. So this process of moving away, maybe in our country, yes, we have a lot of poor people, so they need their welfare schemes in the state. Some states give 500, some states give 1,000, some states give 3,000. So maybe for a while we need doles as well as empowerment. But the goal should be to move away from doles so that the person stands on his own feet. Movement from doles to empowerment is the journey of independence. Because every time you don't educate a person, that person remains uneducated or illiterate or he remains severely disabled, no rehab, no education. Another caregiver also has to remain that way. So there are two people's incomes that the government is losing out. So you have a twin track approach where you educate the individual. He goes out and earns for himself, whatever amount it is. And the other person who is his caregiver goes out and earns for himself. So his own income increases, the GDP of the country increases. So it's individual empowerment plus national level empowerment. And when that person is independent, earning, skilling, etc., the government doesn't have to do these vertical welfare schemes from each state. So this process of empowerment through education is the biggest advice. It increases the GDP of the country. It increases the independence, self-confidence, and self-pride. So this is a twin track approach that helps everybody. We need to move away from that. The second thing I want to talk about is we need amendments in our country. RCI was written in 1992. अब तक amendment नहीं हुई भाई. 2002 में एक amendment हुआ, that's only about research. 1994, our National Trust Act, we still use words like welfare in the name of the act. We still use words like mental retardation. Everybody has moved to ID, intellectual disability. So these two acts, unless it says in the act that these changes I've been talking about, they have to be reflected in the acts of the country, the laws, because all our rights, all our benefits come down. Policies are made after first the acts are made. And all the benefits that accrue in terms of enablement, empowerment, etc., come from the laws. So the laws have to be modernized. They have to be more contemporary, not 20-year-old out-of-date laws. And if we implement the SDGs, all 17, particularly the 5 SDGs that are 4, 8, 10, 11, and 17, that mention disability in particular. These 5 SDGs, the NEP 2020, and the Supreme Court interim orders of October 2021 and November 22, I think will change the entire narrative of disability in the country. We are very good as Indians in making laws and policies. Implementation is a big question mark, but still, I read a lot and I find that NEP, even in countries where there are opposition states, they are opposition parties, they are being implemented at different levels. And you asked me for 3, but I'm going to name one more. We need very reliable, very disaggregated data on disability. We don't have it. In Bangladesh, when they did a census, they found 3.4% disability. When they used the United Nations Washington Group method of data collection, they found 9% disability. We need that in the country. We don't have reliable data. We don't have comparable data. And we don't have now we have 21 disabilities, right? So we need disaggregated data for every one of these in order to make the proper plans, in order to go forward on any kind of action. We need data to back us. I remember when I was in the WHO, every Monday morning we would have everybody had to come to that meeting. It was a big meeting, big room. And one of my colleagues stood up one day and said, in God, we believe. But everyone else, please bring data. And that's my pet peeve, that we don't have enough data in our country.
Very well said, ma'am, really. And thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and articulating that so well. I knew I was speaking to a very experienced and seasoned professional in the space who is such a huge advocate for disability. I would like to share that I'm going to make a synopsis of every single answer to the question and share it with everyone who plans to work in the space of disability or, who wishes to be an advocate for our PWDs and push the agenda for inclusion. I'm really thankful to you for your detailed
Chitra, मैं कुछ बताऊं?
हाँ जी.
Since you are in the field of empowering people, pani pee lo. Okay. Since you are in the field of empowering people, why don't you start a short course on advocacy for marginalized groups? So, advocacy as a subject is seen in social work, seen in psychology, seen in special education, but not in depth and not with very clearly identified goals. So, a short 2 days course, 3 days course, kar lijiye on
Lovely.
A rights-based approach to advocacy.
Yeah. Ma'am, as I was saying, every single expert who I've interviewed, just their answers to the last question about the 3 essential changes that you envision for a better India, with disability. I think even if I put that together, it was going to be a beautiful course in itself. I'm going to take your help on this, actually.
Sure.
I'll work on that. And your replies, I'm saying, were so thoughtful and were very insightful. And I'm sure all the listeners, including me, are going to, it took us through it will take us through this entire journey of the disability movement since it began, since your very first National Trust days. And your guidance on the changes you wish to see for our children will push us to take steps in a more focused way. So thanks a ton for this interview. It will definitely help the entire community and keep guiding us to work ahead into the next couple of decades and to help us catch up with the world. And maybe we'll end up setting up the best practices for the world. Let's aim for that, I guess.
Lots of good wishes and Blessings for your initiative, for your work. My good wishes go out to parents, to professionals, and to those who are self-advocates. We need lots of those, particularly from the neurodevelopment sector. We need to train people to be role models for others.
Yep, amen to that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chitra.
You were listening to the Special Needs Children podcast with Chitra Iyer, the CEO of MFA and a trustee with the Forum for Autism. If you find this podcast relevant and interesting, it will be great if you leave a review, share, like and subscribe. You can also let us know if there is any specific topic that you would like us to cover. Feel free to email her on chitra.iyer@myfinad.com, or you can call her on 9833 785 892. That is 9833 785 892.